ask for a printout. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillahi alladhi ja'ala lil-'ilmi usula wa sahhala biha ilayhi wusula. Wa ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah. Wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan 'abduhu wa rasuluh. Allahumma salli wa sallim ala Muhammadin wa alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. وَمَنْ تَبِعَهُمْ بِإِحْسَانٍ إِلَى يَوْمِ الدِّينِ. All praise and thanks are due to Allah, the one who made for knowledge foundations, and through them facilitated its attainment and preservation. And I bear witness that none has the right to be worshipped except for Allah, alone with no partner. And I bear witness that Muhammad is his servant and messenger. May the salawat and salam of Allah be upon him, his household, and all of his companions, and those that follow them in ihsan. This is the first sitting in understanding a small introduction to the subject of fiqh. And at the start of this book, we want to mention a couple of points. From them, is that from the etiquettes of the students is that they are ready before the teacher. So if they have sunan prayers to pray and the time is wide, then they should sit down and get ready for the class before they pray those prayers. Because for example, after Salat al-Isha, you can pray after we finish the class. As for praying those prayers and then the teacher has to wait for the students, then that is not from the etiquettes of knowledge. And a person will only attain knowledge according to the level that of etiquettes that he has with it and its tools. Second point is Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala is reported to have mentioned that he used to turn his sheet or his paper in front of Imam Malik quietly so as to not disturb him. So it's important likewise that we try our best to not make unnecessary movements or noises during class. Note that we said unnecessary. If there's something that is necessary, it's no problem, but it needs to be appropriate to the settings that we're in. With regards to the book or these notes that we're going to go through, then there are a couple of issues. Number one, that there may be some issues in the subject of fiqh that are difficult to envisage, to picture. And this could be either, or could be because of a lack of expertise or a lack of familiarity, or other reasons. A lack of expertise, for example, when we speak about true fajr, the difference between the timing of true fajr and false fajr. Even if a teacher shows the picture to a student, unless we are familiar and have expertise with that, we may find it difficult, especially being people that we may have never seen the skies except that there were lights. So there are times where you may not be able to envisage or distinguish certain things because of a lack of expertise or a lack of familiarity. From familiarity is, for example, we're going to speak today about using stones to clean yourself after you go to the bathroom. Some of you have never in your life not just had to do that, but you've never seen someone do that. So it may be difficult for you to imagine, because you've never had to live through it. But as long as you can understand what is being said, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, as time goes on, you'll be able to picture it better. Number two is, as is going to, Allahu A'lam, but it's probably going to be the case, there are going to be issues that you're not going to be able to picture. You're going to have questions. So advice is, in order to make the lessons run smoothly, have a piece of paper with your notebook and write your questions on that piece of paper. Don't interrupt the class in the middle, because there's going to be a lot of issues that you may not understand straight away. So write them on a piece of paper and hand them in at the end of the lesson, and we'll answer them inshallah at a specific time. If the question is urgent, then you can ask straight away after the lesson. If you can't wait for the following week or whenever, then you can ask inshallah, and you'll find that bi'idhnillah there will be plenty of time and no one is going to rush you. Third point we want to mention before starting this book on fiqh is that from the way of the Muslim, from the etiquette of the Muslim, is that he is not explicit in his speech. Generally speaking, the Muslim, he doesn't use terms which are explicit. So you find that, and he gets this, the Muslim gets this from reading the Quran and reading a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So you find that he would say, and even in English, he would say, go into the bathroom. He's not going to mention the exact action. Okay? There are exceptions to this. There are exceptions to this, and sometimes learning is an exception where the teacher has to be clear in order for the point to reach the student. So there will be times where there are words mentioned that may not be normally mentioned in public amongst people, but they are done for the purpose of being clear. Otherwise, the person may not understand. And there are other times where we find, for example, the Prophet ﷺ would be clear, would be very clear and mention exact body parts and so forth because of a necessity that arose. But that is not the norm. So there's the norm of a Muslim, and then there are exceptions which are surrounded by necessities, i.e. there's a reason for having to be clear about a certain topic. Last thing before we go into the book, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, is there are some terms that we're not going to translate. There are some terms that we're not going to translate, or we're going to use the Arabic and the English. And the importance of that is that some terminologies are not just linguistic. It's not just going from the Arabic language to English, but they are Islamic terminologies. And so a translation would not do them full justice. From those terms, before I actually give the terms, so what you need to do, what I would advise you strongly to do, is to have a list of keywords for this topic. So in your notes, by the end of each class, you should have a list of keywords, and one of you or two of you should take responsibility for updating these in the WhatsApp group each week, so that you'll have by the end of it a list of key terms. From those terms, we'll mention a couple now, inshallah ta'ala, which you're probably familiar with. Number one, wajib. Number one, wajib. And wajib sometimes is used as yajibu. Yajibu. It's just different forms of the word. Yajibu. And it is something that must be done. It is something that must be done. It is lazim. It is binding. And if you don't get all these Arabic words, that's what the WhatsApp group and revision sessions are for. So don't panic. Number two, mustahab. Mustahab. And that is something that should be done. Mustahab. Something that should be done. I.e., if a person doesn't do it, they're not sinful, but they should do it. They will be rewarded for doing it. The third thing that we want to mention, or the third word, is makruh. Makruh. Yarhamukallah. And that is something that should not be done. Makruh is something that should not be done, something that should be avoided. So if a person falls into it, not that a person is wanting to do it, but a person falls into it, then they are not sinful. Makruh. The fourth and final one that we're going to mention now in this introduction is haram. Makruh, sometimes we'll translate it as it is disliked for, and so forth. That disliked means makruh, i.e. something that shouldn't be done. But if a person falls into it or does it, they are not sinful. Haram is something that cannot be done. Cannot be done. When we say cannot be done, meaning it's not allowed for him to do it. Physically he may be able to do it, but he cannot. Islamically he should not. Not he should, but he cannot do it, i.e. he will be sinful for doing that action. We're going to read the text inshaAllah ta'ala, and then we will add our footnotes bi'idhnillah. Now.
فصل al-Istitaabah. It is an Istinja with water or stones or something similar to it.
Put it closer.
Al-Istinja is the removal by water of a defiling filth which exits from a normal path, or removal of its ruling by a stone or the like. The latter is called Istijmar. It is wajib for everything that exits except three things: wind, a pure thing, and that which does not contaminate or defile. Istijmar is not deemed correct except with four conditions. Firstly, that it is performed with something pure, permissible, dry, able to clean. It is not an item.
And is not, sorry. And it is not and there, but and is not an item.
And it is not an item which contains some form of importance or respect, like some, even if it is for animals or books of knowledge. Secondly, that it consists of 3 wipes, either with a stone that has 3 clear sides or with 3 separate stones. Each wipe is to cover the whole of that particular area of the body. If it is still not clean, then increase, and it is desirable that the last wipe should be on an odd number. Thirdly, that the excrement does not go beyond the normal area of the body. Fourthly, the attainment of being clean. Cleansing with water is that the area of the body returns to how it was with regards to when stones or the like is used. When cleansing means that there remains nothing on the area of the body except some traces which cannot be removed except with water. Fan is sufficient.
Van, so there's a va. Van is sufficient.
Van is sufficient.
The author rahimahullah ta'ala began by mentioning Fasl al-Istitaabah. And the Hanbali scholars, the scholars of the Hanbali school of thought, have a number of names for this section or chapter. From amongst those names, Bab al-Istinja, Bab Adab Qada al-Haja, and other names. For those of you that are familiar with the Arabic language, then a homework is to find out what Istitaabah refers to here, and then connect it to the content of this chapter. Under this section, the author mentions 4 main points. The first of these points is the actuality of al-Istitaabah. And this is found in his statement: it is al-Istinja with water or stones or something similar to it. So it is al-Istinja. So Istitaabah is al-Istinja with, and put a 1, water, or put a 2, stones. And in brackets, or something similar to it, the it refers to stones. The it refers to stones, i.e. Istitaabah is Istinja with water, 1, or with stones. And when we say stones, it means also anything similar to stones, like what we use as toilet paper. The next question that would arise, or the next point that the author mentions, is then what is Istinja? We said Istitaabah is Istinja with water or stones. Okay, what is al-Istinja? He says al-Istinja is the removal by water of a defiling filth which exits from a normal path. That's 1. Istinja is 2 things. 1, the removal of a defiling filth which comes out of the body. by water. Or the second thing that istinja can be is removal of its ruling. The its here is referring filth, to the ruling of filth by stone or the like, i.e. like tissue. And the latter, i.e. this latter one, is called Istijmar. So what we understand from this part of the author's statement is that Istinja is an umbrella term that has two things under it. Istinja is a term that has two things under it. Number one, the removal of filth that comes out of the body from the two private parts by water. And this is called istinja as well. So there's a main term, istinja, and underneath it is istinja, which is the use of water to remove the filth. And the second thing that comes under the general term istinja, the second one is istijmar, which is the removal of filth by stone or its like. So istinja is the head category, and underneath it you have something called istinja itself, the same name, which is the removal of the filth by water. And also you have istijmar, which is the removal of the filth in its ruling. We're going to explain what it means in its ruling by water, by stone. Those of you who have studied shurut as-salah, whether in the lessons we've done in the summer or otherwise, you remember that one of the conditions of wudu is istinja or istijmar. And we used to say, when we explained it, we say istinja is removing the filth by water, and istijmar is removing that by stone. Now, when you've moved up to the next level, this book is slightly more detailed in some things than that book. You come to know that istinja has actually two meanings, a general meaning and a specific meaning under that. And we come to know also that istijmar doesn't remove the filth totally. Water totally purifies a person, but the using of stone or something similar removes the filth, but there are still some traces left. So that's why it says the ruling. So the next question is, what is filth? What is filth? Filth is something that is repulsive, i.e. najis. When we say something is najis, it is something that is repulsive or filth. That's the best translation I could think of. Islamically, najis is something that is filthy Islamically, shar'an, i.e. that there is an Islamic evidence that renders that thing filthy. So if we were to take a step back, we could see that something that we think is filthy is of two types. Something that we think is filthy because there's an Islamic evidence, and something that we think is filthy because of human nature. Something that we think is filthy because of Islamic evidence is like the urine and feces of a human. We know Islamically that is filth, is considered najis. Is filth. Something that we consider filthy due to our nature, due to how we are, is like phlegm. Phlegm is not Islamically impure. We think it's disgusting, it's filthy, but it's not Islamically impure. Meaning, if someone had phlegm on their clothing, they wouldn't have to remove it. They can remove it, but the salah could still be valid. But if they had something Islamically filthy, then they would have to remove it before they can pray. So what we're speaking about here, when we say that it is the removal of filth, najis, which one is it? the Islamic, the Islamic filth. Here also the author mentioned which exits. So it is the filth that exits, i.e. that comes out of the body. It comes out of the body. And he mentions from a normal path. The normal path for filth to exit for a human is two things: the front passage and the back passage. I.e., if the filth was to come out of somewhere else, if a person was sick and so forth, then that is a different discussion. Here, the author is talking about Istinja is the cleaning of that filth that comes out of a human, either with water, so you clean it totally, or you're removing the ruling of that filth by using stones or its like. Okay, so in concluding this main point, what is the difference between removing the filth and removing the ruling of the filth? Yes?
The ruling means that when you're using the stone, or it's like there might be some
traces left. Good. طيب. Istinja, we said, has two meanings. What were they?
There was a comprehensive term, and then it was Istijmar, which is the removal using the stone.
Okay. So Istinja has its comprehensive term, and it has a specific term. What's the specific term?
For the removal using just the water.
Okay, so removal using the water. طيب. Excellent. Naam. Then the author rahimahullah ta'ala went on to mention the third main point in this section of the book, highlighting that it is wajib, i.e. istinja, i.e. using of water or using of stone. It is wajib for everything that comes out of the two normal pathways. Istinja, the using of water or the using of stones, is wajib for everything that comes out of the two pathways. Whether it is a lot or a little. So when he says for everything, whether it is something, a lot of it comes out or a little bit comes out. Whether it is something normal that comes out, like urine, or it is something abnormal, like if someone has he has an infection and a worm or something comes out. So all of that is covered when he says everything. Everything that comes out of two private parts, or the two private passages. Then he gave us an exception. He said, except for three things. Number one, istinja is for everything, except for three things you don't have to. Number one, wind. When a person breaks wind, he doesn't have to do istinja. And when we say istinja, it means istinja or istijmar. And the wind that is intended, when the scholars say wind, it means the wind that is dry, is not accompanied by anything that comes out with it. So sometimes a person breaks wind and there are traces that come out of the person. If those traces come out, then he has to make istinja. And we said istinja means here either water or stones. Number two, the person does not have to make istinja if something pure comes out. If what exits is something pure, then istinja is not required. It is not lam or la yajib. It is not wajib. Something pure, for example, semen, because semen is not najis. Now, a point to be aware of is try your best not to mix between things when you're studying fiqh. So now, for example, he said, it is not wajib to do istinja, i.e. to wash or to wipe that private part. But it's not saying that the person can now pray. He didn't say that. It's still, the person would have to either make wudu or ghusl. So don't mix between the two. What he's saying here is that the person does not have to make istinja. Yeah. And there are several examples of why he would want to do, he might not want to do istinja or need to do istinja, but still do something else. We'll discuss that if you have a question, inshallah, you can discuss it after class. The third thing that the author mentions is if something comes out which does not contaminate or defile, yulawwith, or something which is mulawwithan. And the example that they give, i.e. that the person, when something comes out of him, it does not leave any trace. An example that they give is if a person has a certain level of what I can translate as constipation, i.e. his stool that he passes is extremely dry. Sometimes it comes out and does not leave any trace. Some of you got a look on your face like you're confused. If you didn't experience, alhamdulillah. Yeah, alhamdulillah. So these three things,
What was the term for ferment?
something which is not mulawwithan, i.e. something that is, they say that is the person's, for example, stomach or his stool becomes dry. Yes. So that what comes out of him does not leave any trace, because the trace is left when the stool is normally has some wetness to it. Yeah. Then the author rahimahullah ta'ala went on to mention the fourth point, and that being that istijmar is not deemed correct except with 4 conditions. So here he mentions the conditions for which, or the conditions for the validity of istijmar. Istijmar is what? What did we say it was? So removing the hukum, the ruling of the impurity through the use of stone or its likes. Good. And he mentions here 4 conditions. He mentions these 4 conditions in a kind of general way. So he says, number 1, the first condition, that istijmar is done, it is performed with something pure, permissible, dry, until what you see on the board. So in this first condition, we find different conditions for the thing that is being used. So this is all connected to what you're using to make istijmar. Yes? So the thing must be pure. The stone or whatever you're using has to be pure, it has to be permissible, it has to be dry, and so on. So these are all conditions for the object that the person is using to make istijmar. Don't copy what is on the board word for word, because it will take you too long. But just write the main points, inshallah, and after you can either get a printout or ask for the PDF. Rather, if you try to write everything on the screen, you'll miss what the explanation is saying. So the object with which istijmar is to be done must pass 5 conditions. And this here, all of these conditions are the first conditions of the 4. We said istijmar has 4 conditions. What's the first one? The first one is that the object that you're doing istijmar with passes these conditions. How many are these? There are 5 things. Number 1, so you can number them. This is performed with some, that istijmar is performed with something, number 1, pure. I.e. it is tahir. Tahir, that means pure. It is not najis and it is not mutanajjis. It is not something which is filth Islamically impure, and it is not something which is mutanajjis. Mutanajjis means that it is something pure, but it has been affected by filth. Like it's not a stone that already has filth on it. Someone else has just used it also. Yeah? So mutanajjis is something that originally is pure, but was made impure, or there has impurity attached to it, connected with it. So out of the 5 conditions for the object of istijmar is number 1, that it's pure. Number 2 is that it is permissible. Again, this is something that some of us may not picture, because we think, why would someone steal a stone? But for example, that you're taking a stone from a land that you're allowed to take it from. It's not someone's land that you don't have permission to be on, for example. Yeah? Okay. Number 3, he says that it is dry. That it is dry. Here the dry means it is something dry or firm. i.e. it is not soft, something that will disintegrate or is wet. So when a person wants to use a stone or something like it, it has to be something that will be strong, something that will not disintegrate. Sometimes you might have certain objects that you might pick up and they're brittle. So if you were to put pressure on them, they will disintegrate. You're not allowed to use that to wipe. Why? Because that's going to disintegrate. It's going to cause more problems. If you use it to wipe and it disintegrates, then now you've got the filth, becomes harder to remove. The fourth thing, number 4, so we said number 1, it is pure. Number 2, it is permissible. Number 3, it is dry or firm. Firm would probably be a better word. Number 4, it is able to clean. There are some materials that if you use them, you cannot clean. It just spreads it. There are some materials that if you use them to wipe, they will spread it more. So it is able to clean, i.e. it is not going to spread it more. It is something that has some texture. If something doesn't have, is too smooth without texture, you cannot remove the filth. And the last condition for that object which you do istijmar with, it is what the author says here, and it is not, and is not an item which contains or has some form of importance or respect. It is not muhtarim or muhtaram, afwan. And then he gave some examples. Muhtaram means it has hurma, it has some sort of sanctity of respect. So you're not allowed to use to wipe yourself with something that has some form of sanctity of respect. And he gave examples of that, like dung or food. Even if it is for animals, i.e. even if the food is for animals, even animal food, you're not allowed to use that to wipe yourself. In some books, you'll find that they even says you're not allowed to wipe yourself with an animal. i.e. the animal is alive, you can't use it to wipe yourself. Now we're laughing because we can't imagine it, but in some places it happens. Alhamdulillah, we live in luxury, we don't know. We have a certain form of, our needs are, many of our needs are taken care of. And then he mentions, or books of knowledge. In some countries, I've seen it myself, people use newspapers to wipe themselves. The newspapers sometimes have Allah's name. If they say Abdullah or something like that. So you have to be careful what you're using to clean yourself, yeah? But here they mention books of knowledge, they didn't mention newspapers. I'm just putting it as a side point. So when I looked at the books that I've looked at, they mention books of knowledge. Had I not seen it, I wouldn't believe it. That's what I'm saying. Some things we don't see, we think it sounds very strange. Why would they do that? Because they don't have some of the things that we have, we take for granted. So these aforementioned things that the author has mentioned here, and others like that, like bones, for example, And there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ with regards to these things, because bones are for the food for the jinn. So these aforementioned things hold some form of respect or sanctity. So istijmar is not allowed with them. And the scholars have discussions about some of these conditions. They say, what if someone does it? Is the istijmar valid or not? Some say it's valid, like if someone uses something that is not permissible for them. Some scholars say it is valid, i.e. he done istijmar, it counts, but he is sinful because he's using something that is not his without permission. So there's more details, but take these points as the first condition for istijmar, that the thing that you're using has to fulfill these 5 points. Okay, what is the second condition of istijmar? We mentioned there are 4 conditions. What is the second condition for istijmar? He says that when a person does istijmar, that it is a minimum of 3 wipes. It is a minimum of 3 wipes. Either, when we say 3 wipes, either with a stone, one stone that has 3 separate sides. So it's a stone that is big enough that has 3 separate sides. So use the first side for wiping. The second wipe, you use a different side. Third wipe, you use the third side, not the same side. Or with 3 separate stones. But it must be 3 separate wipes, whether on the same stone that has 3 different sides or separate sides, or with 3 separate stones, or 3 separate things that take the place of stones. Moreover, the wipe, each wipe has to cover that area. Has to cover the area of where the filth normally comes out from. So if we're talking about the more difficult area, so it includes the part where the filth comes out from, the anus, and the part of the buttocks that are next to that. Not the outer buttocks, but the part that are next to the anus. Okay? So the wipe has to cover that area, where it normally comes out from. So each wipe has to cover that. If by the end of 3 wipes it is still not clean, then the person increases. I.e., if there remains a part of the najasa still there, then the person increases another wipe. He increases number 4. He wipes the 4th time. If it is not clean, then he wipes the 5th time. And he does so until it becomes clean. When we say clean, what does it mean? We said it removes the hukum. We then say it removes totally every trace. I.e., the najasa is gone, but there may still be traces. So it removes the hukum. And it is desirable, you see here the word desirable, i.e. mustahab. It is recommended that the last wipe be odd. So for example, the person wipes 3 times. He sees that the area is clean from what he can see on the stone. So he stops. He's done his job. A person wipes 3 times and he still sees some part of the najasa. Then he has to do a 4th. He sees parts, so he has to do a 4th. He does the 4th wipe and he's still not clean. So he does a 5th one. He has to do the 5th one, and then he sees that it's clean, he stops because it's an odd number. Yes? He does the 4th, imagine he does the 4th one and he sees that it's clean. Now he can stop, but it is better for him to do the 5th one, to finish on an odd number. A side point here, and it's an important side point. Some of the scholars have highlighted and mentioned that when knowledge decreases, when knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah decrease, of the religion, then innovation increases. When knowledge is scarce, innovation increases. And this is also true, Allah knows best, I didn't see a scholar say it, but when knowledge decreases, difficulty in the religion also increases. People end up making things difficult for themselves. Sometimes you find that may Allah protect us, some people wipe themselves until they bleed. Until they're bleeding. Some people spend up to an hour trying to clean themselves. Imagine, in a time, even in our time, Allah has legislated, told us, you can wipe with a stone. The stone, what color is it normally? It's dark, isn't it? Yeah. When you wipe, are you going to see the small tiny traces on it? No, most likely not. It is forgiven. But one of the problems, people use a white toilet paper, they say, oh, I think I see something. So in the time of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, when they use a stone, they wouldn't be able to see that, what you're trying to see now. Understood? But because we don't know the deen, we're trying to be extra careful, and shaitan plays with us sometimes. And if a person allows himself or herself to delve into that, it can destroy their life. Because their routine, they can't do basic things because they're thinking, oh, I still see a trace. Listen, there was not white, it wasn't white. We're using white toilet paper, so you can see even something is not there, you think you see it. But if you had to use a stone, what would you think? You wouldn't be able to function. Allah made this deen easy. No one tries to make the deen hard except that it will overtake them. It will overtake them. So it is something clear. In the beginners' books of fiqh, this is discussed. But because we're not studying, we make it as hard for ourselves. You don't have to wash with water and stones. You can do one or the other. Even though it may be better, it is better to combine. Okay, to use, to wipe first and then wash. But the point that I want to make here is, if we don't learn, the deen will seem difficult unnecessarily. So it's important that we spend time to learn. The third condition that the author rahimahullah ta'ala mentioned out of the 4 conditions when using istijmar is that the excrement does not go beyond the normal area of the body. I.e., normally when a person goes to the toilet, there will be a normal area where it's normally filth. If it goes beyond that, then the scholars explain, or some of the scholars explain, that whatever is beyond has to be cleaned by water. So for example, a person is urinating, and because they stand up before they finish or whatever, some urine goes onto their knee. Okay? Now that is not normally where urine goes when you go to the bathroom. So you have to wash that. Okay? Number 4, the 4th condition is the attainment of being clean. I.e., that by the end of it, the filth has been removed. Either truly removed with water, or if we're talking about istijmar here, it is removed in the ruling. There may be some small traces, but the filth, the actual thing, has been removed. Even if some traces, small traces remain.
Can you repeat the last one, sorry?
The last point here is that cleanliness, the removal of the filth, has been achieved. And the author explains to us what it means with water. He says cleansing with water is that the area of the body returns to how it was. So what do we mean by that? The cleanliness has been achieved. If you're using water, it means that that area of the body returns back to how it was before the filth had come out. And if it's attaining cleanliness, when we talk about using stones on the likes, what does it mean? It means that there remains nothing of the filth on that area of the body except for some traces, except for some small traces that cannot be removed with water, except with water. that cannot be removed except with water, i.e. it is too difficult to remove them. Like I said, if a person tries to remove them, he ends up making himself bleed. It's too difficult. So what does it mean to attain cleanliness? It means if you're using water, it means that the filth has gone, and that area of the body returns to how it was before you went to the bathroom. What does it mean to attain cleanliness if you're doing istijmar, if you're using a stone or its like? It means that there remains nothing of that area of the body is clean, there remains nothing of the filth, the actual filth, nothing remains, except for some small traces that cannot be removed except with water. Only water would remove them. It's too difficult to remove them with a stone or the likes. So there remains no actual part of the excrement, but there may remain some effects or traces of it, which is pardoned because of the hardship. It is pardoned, Allah forgives it because of the hardship of removing it. That's why it is said that istijmar is removing the ruling of najasa, even though some small thing may be there. So in actuality, if you wanted to be technical, you say there's still some small najasa there. Yeah, the traces, that means the traces. That's why they said hukm, if you're removing it, the ruling of it. Then the author closes this section of the book by saying dhann is sufficient, i.e. meaning certainty is not a condition, rather dhann is sufficient. Yaqeen is not a condition, rather dhann is sufficient, meaning that the person is not required to have absolute certainty that that area of the body or that level of cleanliness that we just mentioned has been achieved. He doesn't have to be 100% sure. Rather, it is sufficient that he, now careful how we say it, dhann here, it's that he most likely views it as having gone. Yeah, the problem, I try to avoid the word belief because people say, how can I just believe it? What it means is that you take an educated guess. Most likely, from what you see, you're 90% sure or highly sure that it's gone. But you're not 100, it's not like you say, I've checked with the microscope, or I took a picture, I used it, because you can't see it. Yeah? Dhann. Dhann is used in two ways. A dhann which is a preponderant view, i.e. the most likely view. And there's the other word dhann, which is what you're probably familiar with, which is they just think. Wahm, it's called wahm. It's kind of suspicion or a delusional way. Yeah. What it means here is the dhann which is ghalib, that is the most likely, you're sure, almost 100, not 100, but you're pretty certain. So that is enough for a person. And that is in many things in Islam. That's why when people have wiswas, they think, I'm not sure. But you don't have to be 100% sure about everything. You could be almost 100% sure. You could be highly sure. Yeah? With that, we finish this section of the book. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala, next session will be about the siwak and some of the aspects of fitrah. What is advised is that you take another day of the week, preferably after a couple of days, and you listen to the video. We're going to put the video up. You listen to it with the text, with your notes, and you go through it, inshallah ta'ala. And you write any questions, either send it on the WhatsApp or drop them in now, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. With that, we stop. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. بارك الله فيك.